The history of the Netherlands. The early years. It may be hard to believe, but back in the day, way back in the day, this land was one big swamp and tundra. Wolves, bears and smaller animals roamed the land, and it was only nature who reigned. The first human-like creatures were Neanderthalers, who lived here 200,000 years ago, but only temporarily. The first permanent inhabitants, hunters, date back to the Ice Age. Their axes and arrow points of flint were found in the southern and eastern part of the land. The oldest boat ever found, a canoe, is also from that same period, somewhere around 8000 BC. You can see this canoe in the Drents Museum in Assen. It was after the Ice Age that many different tribes were forming, and around 5300 BC the fertile land was discovered, though only in the southern part they could work on it, since the heavy clay was no match for their simple tools. The ages following formed many cultures, as they are called. Most notable was the trechter-beker-cultuur, or funnel-bekel culture, named after the round and funnel-shaped mugs, also found in Drenthe. The famous hunebedden, dolmens and other megalithic monuments were being erected around this time, 3300 BC. But as with many tribes and forms of life, this culture also vanished. The Bronze Age started around 2000 BC and gave the people tools, but also other valuable objects, which could indicate that the area now known as Drenthe could have been the trade center of the Netherlands. Where the Bronze Age started the trade culture, the Iron Age, 1200 BC, truly brought the first fortunes. Iron ore was found in the north, center and south. Smiths traveled and made tools on demand, such as axes, knives, pins, arrowheads, swords, etc. Even damast forging, an advanced way to forge metal, such as swords, with the advantage of flexible iron, with the strength of steel. Up until the Romans entered the land, the inhabitants were battling Celtic and Germanic tribes. Eventually, these Celtic and Germanic tribes settled down. The Batavians, descendants of a Germanic tribe, proved to be excellent soldiers and fought in many battles to come. Batavians are for many Dutchmen the true forefathers. The Roman Era. 58 BC. The armies of Julius Caesar conquered the Low Countries. It effectively became the northern border of the Roman Empire, since the Frisians stood tall. This part of Holland, now known as Friesland and Groningen, never came under Roman rule. The Romans were the first to build cities and military forts, and established the province of Germania Inferior. The most important city dated from this time is Nijmegen, in present-day Brabant. Roman occupation was less aggressive than in other regions at the time. Even the Batavians served in the Roman cavalry. Roman culture left its mark, as is to be seen in Elst, in the province of Gelderland. Underneath the church, you clearly can see the remnants of two Roman temples, dedicated to the local gods. But all did not stay quiet. In 69 AD, a massive revolt broke out. The Roman army used young Batavians as their slaves. Batavian leader Gaius Julius Civilis led an effective battle, burning down 40 castella, or itinerary stations. He was joined by other Roman soldiers, which split the northern part of the army. A year later, after several legions were dispatched, the Batavians were defeated. In the end, the Western Roman Empire collapsed. Massive migration of Germanic peoples poured into the Low Countries. It's what the Dutch call volksverhuizingen. It certainly stirred up the different tribes. The early Middle Ages and the Roman Holy Empire. Although writing was introduced, there is not much written knowledge of what came directly after the end of Roman occupation. The Franks, a federation of tribes that lived north and east of the Roman lines in the 3rd century, expanded into northern Gaul, and therefore the Low Countries. After their king Clovis I converted to Catholicism in 496, the Franks became Christians. And after the Franks conquered the very north of the Low Countries, Friesland, they also were converted to Christianity by traveling monks. The Kingdom of the Frisians. That is how Frankish chronologies described the northern part of Holland in the 7th and 8th centuries. This kingdom had its seat in Utrecht and was led by kings Aldegisel and Redbad. The end of the Frisian kingdom came in 734 with the Battle of the Borne. From 800 to 1000 AD, the Low Countries suffered a great deal from Viking raids. Viking King Rorik ruled over the Netherlands from Dorestad, an important and flourishing trade center. But the Viking rule was short-lived. The German King Henry liberated Utrecht and subsequently defeated the Vikings in 920. During the 10th and 11th century, German kings and emperors ruled over Holland. With the coronation of King Otto the Great as emperor, Germany, and therefore Holland as well, was called the Holy Roman Empire. The most important cities were Nijmegen and Utrecht. Nijmegen as a theological and political center, Utrecht because of the trade and the centered location. The rest of Holland was scarcely populated. That changed after farmers from Flanders and Utrecht bought up land and cultivated it. Within generations, farms popped up. And with the increase of food and production, the population and the economy grew fast. Tradesmen, guilds and markets were established as production exceeded the needs of the population. Local currency was introduced, and new villages were erected and existing ones expanded. Villages became towns and they developed into cities, the bulk of them in Flanders and Brabant. But the Holy Roman Empire was not able to hold its grip on them. Local rulers turned their counties and duchies into private kingdoms, bitterly battling their neighbors. In the end, several parts of the Low Countries found their independence, such as Groningen, Drenthe and most of Gelre, or most parts of current Gelderland. Friesland remained independent throughout this struggle. It resented the imposition of the feudal system. Their motto and battle cry, "Better dead than a slave," was heard many times. But eventually, even the Frisians had to give up. The Burgundian period. Most of what we now know as the Netherlands and Belgium was brought together by the Duke of Burgundy in 1433. The Burgundian period marks the start of the Dutch road to nationhood. It started rather peculiarly. Most historians believe that it began with the notion of Dutch traders that the Flemish economic system was doing so well, they wanted part of it too. So, noblemen invited the Duke Philip the Good to invade and conquer Holland, while there was no historic claim or reason to it. After years of battle, the Duke succeeded, and Dutch trade developed rapidly. Amsterdam grew and became the primary trading port in Europe for grain from the Baltic region. Amsterdam traded grain with Belgium, northern France and England, out of sheer necessity. Holland produced not enough grain to feed itself. Aside from local resistance in Gelre and Friesland, the Burgundian period is known for its development of a national identity and prosperity. 80 Years' War. Through inheritance and conquest, the Low Countries became part of the Habsburg dynasty, ruled by Charles V in the 16th century. He united the Low Countries into one entity. In 1548, he granted the 17 provinces of the Netherlands status as an entity separate from both the Empire and from France with the Transaction of Augsburg. It was not a full independence, though, and Charles's successor, his son Philip II of Spain, had little to no personal ties with the Dutch provinces. As a devout Catholic, Philip was angry with the success of the Reformation in the Low Countries. Calvinism was the Reformed theological system getting more and more popular. Philip tried to enforce religious persecution of the Protestants, centralize government, justice, and taxes. It made him very unpopular, and a revolt was the result. It all began on April 1st, 1572 in Den Briel, the beginning of the 80 Years' War. The first years of the revolt was led by William of Orange, who was a stadtholder for the Spanish king, but defected to the Dutch cause. The 7 rebellious provinces united in the Union of Utrecht in 1579. And formed the Republic of the 7 United Netherlands. The Act of Abjuration, or in Dutch Plakkaat van Verlatingen, was signed on July 26, 1581, the formal declaration of independence. Although the Spanish king had some success in the first years of the war, he eventually lost control of the Netherlands, after the plunder of Antwerp by mutinous Spanish soldiers. They killed over 10,000 people. Not everyone was on the Dutch side of the revolt, since the Low Countries also had a large Catholic population. They were mostly situated in the south and east, and stayed loyal to the Spanish king. Spain recaptured Antwerp and many other Flemish and Dutch cities. Most of the territory in the Netherlands was recaptured, but not in Flanders. It marked the split between the Netherlands and present-day Belgium. The fight for independence, although not a day-to-day battle, continued up to 1648. On January 30th of that year, the Peace of Westphalia was signed. It confirmed the independence of the United Provinces from Spain and Germany. Although the Dutch never considered themselves part of the Germans since the 15th century, officially, they remained a part of the Holy Roman Empire. Since the national identity was principally formed by the province people came from, and Holland being the most influential province, the Republic of the 7 Provinces was in foreign countries commonly known as Holland. The Golden Age. The 17th century has been dubbed the Golden Age, not for nothing. During the 80 Years' War, the Dutch provinces took over Flanders as the most important trading center of Northern Europe. Dutch ships were hunting for whales. Through the newly founded Dutch East India Company, they traded spices in India and Indonesia. They founded numerous colonies in New Amsterdam, present-day New York, South Africa, and the West Indies. They captured Portuguese colonies and money poured in. An important part of Dutch wealth came from slavery. In 1619, Dutch merchants joined in the slave trade between Africa and America. By 1650, Holland became the most important slave trading country in Europe. They handed over this dubious position to Britain around 1700. Politically, the Republic was not ruled by a king, but by regents. After failing to find common ground to establish a competent sovereign, provinces were given a fair amount of governing power. Their representative reported to the Estates General, the Staten-Generaal. Aside from their representatives, the true man with power was the stadtholder, a position held by a descendant of the House of Orange. Around this time, between 1640 and 1642, Dutch painter Rembrandt van Vermeer worked on the night watch, or in Dutch, de nachtwacht. Stadtholder and unifier William II, Prince of Orange, died in 1650 of smallpox. he left the nation without an obvious successor. The power struggle between the regents, the informal rich elite, and the Orangists intensified. But for now, the regents reigned. Dutch trade interests were dealt a severe blow by the British-imposed First Navigation Act in 1651. An incident at sea resulted in the First Anglo-Dutch War. After the Second War with the British, peace finally came with the Treaty of the Peace of Breda in 1667. It stayed quiet for a couple of years, until 1672. The Dutch call it the disastrous year, het rampjaar. England again declared war on the Republic, followed by France, Munster, and Cologne. These last three invaded the Republic. A new stadholder was appointed, William III. Admiral Michiel de Ruyter fought 3 desperate naval battles to repel an Anglo-French attempt to land on the Dutch shore. Advancing French troops from the south could only be stopped by breaching river dikes. After fighting back the troops of Cologne and Munster with the aid of German princes, peace was also signed with England in 1674, the Treaty of Westminster. 4 years later, peace was made with France with the signing of the Treaty of Nijmegen. But again, peace was short-lived. Stadholder William III, invited by Protestant British nobles, invaded England. James II of England fled to France, and William ascended the throne as co-monarch with his wife Mary. England was now a sure ally of the Netherlands in its ongoing wars with France, since William remained the commander of the Dutch army as well. Holland was a magnet for immigrants. People in most parts of Europe were very poor, and unemployment was high. And so, many immigrants came to the cities of the province Holland in the 17th and 18th century, Amsterdam being the center of it all. With all these different cultures being imported, tolerance was crucial. At the end of the 17th century, until the end of the 18th century, the Dutch economy slowed down, and the Netherlands lost their position as the trading center of Northern Europe. Revolution, Republic, and rule under the French. By the end of the 18th century, there was a growing political unrest. The Orangists, in favor of more power to Stadholder William V of Orange, and the Patriots, who wanted to follow the ideas of the American Revolution and favored a more democratic form of government, collided. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War broke out because of the Dutch recognition of U.S. independence. The armed rebellion by the Patriots in 1785, by many seen as the forerunner of the French Revolution, was suppressed by the House of Orange. Lynchings, lootings, and extortion made many patriots flee to Brabant or France. It is estimated that at least 40,000 people left Holland. Without much surprise, the French army, who invaded the Netherlands in 1795, encountered little organized resistance. William V of Orange fled to England, and the Patriots proclaimed a short-lived Batavian Republic. In 1806, Napoleon restyled the Netherlands into the Kingdom of Holland and appointed his brother Louis Bonaparte as king. But when his brother put the Dutch interests ahead of the French, Napoleon quickly incorporated the Netherlands into the French Empire. William VI of Orange defeated Napoleon in 1813, and the French occupation ended. And in 1815, the official name became the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. It put the country back on the international map. The road to Dutch monarchy. Many countries in Europe wanted the Netherlands to be the strong nation it was before, often because of their own political and economic gain. The Dutch East Indies were returned. The northern and southern part of the country became a sovereign state for the first time in 1815, with two capitals, Amsterdam and Brussels. The Netherlands finally became a monarchy when the son of the last stadtholder, William V, the Prince of Orange, was appointed King William I. The French-speaking ruling elite in the very southern part of the Netherlands was not amused. They were starting to feel like second-class citizens. Because of religion, the south was mainly Roman Catholic, the north Protestant. Because of the economy, the south was industrializing. The north had always been a merchant's nation. And because of the language, the south spoke French, the north Dutch. It all came to a political explosion, and the Belgians declared independence from the north in 1830. King William's army had to retreat after a couple of days because the French mobilized their massive army. Because of unrest throughout Europe in 1848, King William II agreed to liberal and democratic reforms. Johann Rudolf Thorbecke was asked by the king to rewrite the constitution, effectively turning the Netherlands into a constitutional monarchy. On November 3rd of that same year, 1848, the document was proclaimed valid. The king's powers were greatly limited. Government was only held accountable to an elected parliament, and civil liberties were protected. The very essence of this document has remained unchanged ever since, and it forms the backbone of the Dutch system. The Dutch rule of Luxembourg ended in 1890, and the geographical and political shape of the Netherlands on the European continent finally became what it is today. Abroad, during these final years of the 19th century, the Netherlands firmed their grip on colonies and extended their hold on Indonesia. Around this time, a troubled 30-something-year-old man crafted his very first major work, The Potato Eaters, in Dutch de Aardappeleters, a dark painting depicting the harsh life of rural Holland. The name of this painter? Vincent Willem van Gogh. The beginning of the 20th century. The 20th century brought many big changes. The Netherlands switched from predominantly trade and agriculture to industry. The Dutch had been neutral for a long time after the 7 Years' War. Their wealth had grown fast. Their military might, however, not. The Netherlands were unable to defend themselves in case of war. Their policy of neutrality was therefore paramount to their safekeeping. The First World War, or the Great War, was the first test of Dutch neutrality in the 20th century. Germany chose not to invade or pass through the Netherlands, since many goods were transported through the port of Rotterdam by way of the River Rhine. But also the Allies had their interest in keeping the Netherlands neutral. The Schelde River and the Maas was a way of transport into France. But the Dutch were affected by the war. Troops were mobilized. Conscription was introduced. There was not enough food. There were riots, and many immigrants fleeing war-torn regions. Food smuggling at the border with Belgium caused great problems, including inflation and more shortages. After the war, two major notable changes were made to the constitution. In 1917, after pressure from socialist movements, all men were allowed to vote. Before, only men with high incomes were eligible. 2 years later, women also obtained the right to vote. The stock market crash of 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression left also on the Netherlands its mark. In fact, the effects lasted longer here than in any other European country. The strict fiscal policy of the Netherlands dictated to adhere to the gold standard, and the Netherlands took a hard hit because of that. Widespread poverty and unemployment and social unrest sent the country in a downward spiral. The Second World War. If there is one single event in the 20th century which marks are to this day still visible and noticeable both on the streets and in the Dutch psyche, it is undoubtedly the Second World War. The Dutch eyed the rising Nazism with growing concern, but also expected that Germany would again respect their neutrality, and declared this neutrality at the outbreak of World War II in 1939. But on May 10, 1940, Nazi Germany launched their attack on Belgium and the Netherlands. Within days, the country's poor-equipped armies were overrun. On May 14th, the Germans commanded the surrender of Rotterdam. The Dutch complied, but the German Luftwaffe bombed the city nevertheless. Around 900 people died, leaving 78,000 homeless. Following same threats for Utrecht and other cities, the Netherlands capitulated on May 15th in a small town called Rijsoord. The royal family and secretaries had already fled the country to London. Some members of the royal family eventually went to Ottawa, Canada, where Princess Margriet was born. German occupation was described in the early months as bearable. German officials and the local Nazi party NSB tried to convince the Dutch to their national socialistic approach. German officers reported that the dockyards, airplane manufacturers and other war industry-related businesses. Dutch companies flourished, adding fuel to the discussion, do we join them or fight them underground? Months after the invasion, the persecution of Jews also started in the Netherlands. At the beginning of the war, around 140,000 Jews lived in the Netherlands, mostly in Amsterdam. Only 40,000 would survive the war. Of the 100,000 Jews that did not go into hiding, merely 1,000 survived. Anne Frank being that one girl who gained worldwide fame when her diary Het Achterhuis, the back house, was published after the war. She died early March 1945 in the concentration camp Bergen-Belsen, age 15. Dutch resistance grew as the German oppression became more rough, and deportations were a daily occurrence. And although thousands collaborated with the Nazis, many joined the resistance. Food and other products were scarce. Much of it went to the front. In February 1941, the Dutch organized a national strike. It did nothing to stop the deportation, though, nor brought it more food. From that day on, the Nazis became even more cruel. After the Allies landed in Normandy, relief and hope for a speedy liberation grew. Within months, Canadian and British troops conducted major operations on Dutch soil from September onwards. On the 17th of that month, Operation Market Garden commenced, with the goal of capturing key bridges across the Rhine. The bridge at Arnhem, however, could not be captured. Allied troop advancements came to a halt. The last year of the German occupation was the hardest on most of the northern part of the population. The winter of 1944-45 was an extremely long and cold one, and with many warehouses depleted, many tried to stay alive by eating flower bulbs. People from the cities went on so-called hunger raids to rural parts of the country in search of anything to eat. Around 20,000 people died of hunger or froze to death during this hunger winter. By the end of the war, the Allies dropped, under the name of Operation Manna, tons of food from airplanes. On May 6, 1945, German troops in the Netherlands capitulated in Hotel de Wereld in Wageningen. Post-war. 2 days after the capitulation of Japan, Indonesian nationalists declared independence. After years of paramilitary operations by the Dutch in order to try and retake control, the Netherlands finally withdrew and formally recognized Indonesian independence on December 27, 1949. The American Marshall Aid was instrumental in the redevelopment of the Dutch economy. The 50s gave the economy an enormous boost. Demand for labor was so strong that immigration was encouraged, first from Mediterranean countries, later in larger numbers from Turkey and Morocco. Disaster struck in the cold night of January 31st and February 1st, 1953. A huge storm combined with extremely high tide caused the collapse of many dikes in the southwestern part of the country. More than 1,800 people died. Over 100,000 became homeless. It spurred the large-scale program of public works, called the Delta Works, to protect the country against future floods. Dikes had to be built higher. Rivers and lakes were being cut off from the sea, and thousands of miles of dams, locks, sluices, and storm surge barriers were built. It effectively shortened the Dutch coastline with over 400 miles. It took over 50 years to get the job done. A year before completion of the world's largest flood protection plan, reinforcements of parts of the Delta Works started to keep in pace with the effects of global warming and rising sea levels. The 60s and 70s were a time of many cultural and social changes. Youths and students were fed up with traditional old-fashioned way of life. They pushed for change in women's rights, sexuality, disarmament, and environmental issues. Many protests were being held. It also helped shape the liberal phase of the Netherlands, with its tolerance of many soft drugs, legalization of euthanasia, and the legal acceptance of same-sex marriages in 2001. After the decolonization of Suriname in the mid-70s, combined with the immigration from the Netherlands Antilles and many other parts of the world, the Netherlands was becoming a more multicultural country. In the European arena, the Netherlands now are a driving force. They were among the founders of the European Coal and Steel Community, which evolved into the European Union. It was also a founding member of NATO and participated in the introduction of the euro, which has been the currency in the Netherlands since 2002. Politically, the Netherlands continues to develop, seemingly losing its left-liberal signature and moving slowly to the center and possible more to the right of the political spectrum. The assassinations of populist politician Pim Fortuyn, who called for a very strict policy on immigration, and film director and publicist Theo van Gogh, great-grandson of Vincent van Gogh's brother, further shaped the changing political landscape. It sparked the discussion on the position of radical Islam, and of Islam in general in the Dutch society, on immigration and integration. On April 30, 2009, Queen's Day, a young Dutchman tried to assassinate members of the royal family. He drove his car through barricades in the city of Apeldoorn during a parade, killing 8 people, including himself. No members of the royal family were hurt. A year later, the Netherlands Antilles were dissolved. After referendums on the islands, Bonaire, Saba and St. Eustatius, also known as the Bes Islands, were incorporated as special municipalities. These are now commonly known as the Caribbean Netherlands. This concludes the history of the Netherlands. This narration will be updated with relevant information when needed.